Hi, and welcome to this week's Auspicious Agile video blog. We're going to take a look at SAFe, which is Scaled Agile Framework, Agile Contracts, this week. This is a continuation of the series. We've done an earlier blog post on Auspicious Agile, which you can find a link to down in the links section. And we're going to be extending that series on Agile Contracts. This is in response to a blog post recently on the Scaled Agile Framework website. We'll be looking at some of the different concepts there. But before we do that, let's take a look back and look at some of the different Agile contract approaches that we've covered, as well as some of the other Agile contract approaches that are available. So first off, looking back at the Agile contracts and taking a little bit of a retro view here, we're going to first take a look at the three areas that we covered in our last Auspicious Agile blog post on the topic. Working with a few key vendors, so basically picking one or two vendors that you're going to work with, or three vendors that you're going to work with consistently, so you can set up your contracts with them and be able to work with them without a lot of disturbance and with an ongoing relationship. Considerations in structuring the contracts, which we are going to take a look at again today, and also measuring the delivery and return on investment. So looking at delivery milestones and that type of thing as well, we're going to look at here in today's Auspicious Agile video. So first, let's take a general look at some different approaches to doing agile contracts and different models. This is a diagram from the Scaled Agile Framework blog post. I'm going to be using a few of these for commentary as we go through today's Auspicious Agile. So on the left-hand side of the spectrum, you can see the firm fixed price contract. Now, firm fixed price contract is one that most people are used to. It's kind of the iron triangle, we call it: scope, schedule, and budget are set. However, it's difficult for Agile because the motivations are for the vendor to finish and make as much profit as possible, of course, and that might mean that they're not willing to take any changes or anything else. And for the customer, want to get as much as they can, and certainly everything that was committed to. So from an Agile contract perspective, this is not great. Time and materials may at first blush look like it's really good for Agile contracts, but actually there's not much to keep the vendor accountable. The vendor can just keep on working away and say that they're doing certain things, and may or may not be. I hope that they are, but it's possible that they're not. And the vendor wants to get paid for as long as possible, so they could keep kind of running out the clock and just keep on doing additional work, and that may not be beneficial. I'm not going to spend too much time on the target price and the cost plus models, although those are also kind of on the spectrum. I do want to take a look at another one from Jess Sutherland and from Scrum Inc., which is called Money for Nothing and Change for Free. Now, in the money for nothing and change for free model, what we have, this is kind of designed for Agile contracts, and the idea is that in the money for nothing part, the customer is expected to be very active in the project, working closely with the project team. You'll see a little bit later in the SAFe approach that indeed, again, the customer is expected to be very actively involved. So the money for nothing, the customer is involved very closely. The customer gets the option to stop after any sprint. So the customer pays 20% of the remaining contract. If they want to do an early termination of the contract, they pay 20% and they're able to stop the contract. The company will commit to deliver 80% of the backlog is what we call high quality. So figuring 80% is high quality means that it meets the definition of done. So that's going to be a definition of done agreed to between the customer and the vendor or the contracting company. Now, the change for free part is that the customer can make changes to the scope without any added charges. So this has to be at the boundary of a sprint, right? Can't be right in the middle, but at the boundary of a sprint. And if equal scope items are removed, and the other items can be put in to the scope. So again, customer is very closely interactive, high quality, Agile definition of done, and this is the money for nothing and change for free approach. Now, let's go into the SAFe Agile contracting approach. So it basically has two pieces. One is the pre-commitment phase, and the second is called the contract execution phase. So let's look first at the pre-commitment phase. In the pre-commitment phase, the customer and supplier are going to work together, and they're going to come up with terms, which is nothing new. And you can see in this diagram also from the SAFe Scaled Agile Framework blog that there are certain things the customer is doing training and committing on contract model, supplier is committing to the contract model and defining preliminary scope and feasibility, And there are some additional things that are happening here that are joint responsibilities together, setting up the terms for both the customer and the supplier. So some of the joint things that are going to be worked on come directly out of SAFe. They're very specific to Scaled Agile framework. When I talk about a PI or program increment, I'm talking about basically a quarterly release. So think of that as a quarterly release cycle if you're not familiar with that terminology. Now, some of the things that they're going to be working on together include establishing the initial vision and roadmap for the contract and for the project or the initiative, defining a fixed variable solution intent and fixed and variable solution intent, so the different solution intent for 4-level SAFe, establishing the economic framework, establishing the responsibilities and contract boundaries, and prioritizing the PI planning backlog or the quarterly release backlog. So the team, they're going to collaborate, the customer and the contract and the contracting party, to collaborate on that. Again, these are very SAFe specific terms, so keep that in mind. Now, we also have this pay-as-you-go approach that's being followed here. So maybe you start with about 2 PIs, which is about 20 weeks. Each PI, or program increment, is usually 10 to 12 weeks long, which means about 20 weeks and maybe an initial contract. And this aligns with the incremental funding model we'll talk about a little bit more. We talked about it in the previous post, kind of this Lego brick or incremental funding model. In that case, we use sprints. Here in SAFe, we're using program increments, but the idea is to be able to fund or stop funding as you go as you're seeing value delivered. Now, we also have in the contract execution, which is the second part of the SAFe approach to contracts and agile contracts. And we have this basically this trust but verify approach. So we're kind of working, but we're also checking and seeing. Here's another diagram from the Scaled Agile blog. So we're working, we're verifying the work that's being done, and each program increment is going to represent a milestone where the customer may decide they're going to stay steady, they're going to increase or decrease or wind down on the funding. So there's a lot of milestones that are available within SAFe that allow us to do this. And the customer, of course, like we talked about above with money for nothing and change for free, the customer needs to really be involved. So you have things like solutions demos, systems demos, inspect and adapt sessions, and of course the program increments themselves, which serve as points where we can make some decisions about additional contracts, additional funding. Are we going to go for an additional contract term for another program increment? And at that point, we make some decisions about that and decide, are we going to stay steady? Are we going to increase, decrease? Are we going to wind it down? Also, important to note when we talk about those solution demos are in 4-level SAFe, so they're part of that value stream level in SAFe. So these are different aspects and milestones where we can make some decisions about our funding, about our contract, and how we're going to proceed. That kind of Lego brick incremental model, which is nice with Agile. Now, here's some closing considerations to keep in mind. The first thing is, of course, that incremental model. So whether you're using a scaled Agile approach or maybe you're using just a traditional Scrum team, which is not a scaling, you're still going to have that incremental option. So I like this in the scaled Agile approach where you can actually say it's sprint boundaries or the PI boundary, quarterly release boundary that you decide to fund or add funding, or maybe you decide to go decrease, increase, or wind down. So that's great flexibility from an Agile perspective. Second, we have customer involvement. Just like we said in the SAFe approach and the money for nothing and change for free approach, we are looking to one at Scrum Inc., which has Sutherland. Each one of these approaches, indeed Leffingwell's approach here in SAFe, is that we really need to have the customer very involved. They're attending solution demos. They are attending system demos and inspecting adapt sessions and program increment planning. So the customer is heavily involved. They're very close with the team. They see what the results are, what the outputs are, and we can make some milestone decisions. And that brings us to our third point, which is the milestone. So SAFe provides us with some great milestones we can look at. In traditional Scrum team, it might just be the sprint boundary. In SAFe, we have a few more. We have system demos and solution demos and program increments and inspect and adapt sessions, basically over that quarterly cadence, which is about 10 to 12 weeks. That gives us some good milestones for our contract. So a SAFe model, very nice Agile model, especially if you're using the Scaled Agile framework, and applicable points that you can use even if you're not. So with that, hopefully there's been some good food for thought for you as you do your Agile contracts and building on what we talked about the last time. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay Agile.